how would I summarize the story of Billy Tipton? He was a trans-masculine jazz musician. Pretty simple.
The first phrase that always comes to my mind is the gentleman's gentleman. Just the consummate professional and the gentleman's gentleman.
The first time that I learned about Billy Tipton was probably 2003 or 2004. Just before I started my medical transition, I was doing a ton of research at that point. And so I wanted to learn about my ancestors essentially that came before me.
In a way, Billy has been with me in sort of the background before my transition, and thinking about him again from the place of being a trans man was very interesting for me, because I think I had held him, in just a sort of general context of queerness prior to that.
Aisling and Chase, welcome and thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thanks. Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, we're at TIFF, we're on a stage, we have a whole audience listening to us right now. Let's imagine that. No ordinary TIFF, let's call it that, right? And now you got we got No Ordinary Man. Let me ask you now, Aisling, you were part of this project early on. It was just you and the producers, and this is at a point where you knew you were making a documentary about Billy Tipton, but at this point the documentary hadn't taken any kind of shape or form as yet. So talk to me about that kind of creative process from there, and how you went about developing this project.
Yeah, so the project really, it was being developed by Sarah Spring at Parabola Films for a little while. She had been interested in learning more about Billy Tipton and his legacy. So when I came on board, it was also kind of in the same vein. I was really curious about about this person who has this disputed identity and story, and there was lots of different ways that he was being framed, but it became quite clear early on that he was living his life as a trans man, and as somebody who's not trans, and that's not my experience, it was quite evident that it would need to be a project that was a creative collaboration with trans artists. So that's when Amos Mack, my co-writer, came on board, and Chase came on board to co-direct it with me. And so really, once the three of us got together, it was the birth of, our film as it stands today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because these people, Amos Mack and Chase, both you came on board. A lot of the excuses I hear when people are coming up with excuses for the lack of representation behind the scenes in their film, a lot of them say, "Oh, the talent isn't there. The talent isn't ready yet." Chase, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah.
When you hear those excuses,
how much time do you have? I feel, it's an easy thing to say. Part of there's no one there is because people haven't been offered the same access points early on in their careers to develop their skill sets. So it's not that there are no trans directors, it's that people haven't necessarily come of age through the most recognizable routes of schooling and networks. We are in an industry full of trans and non-binary talent, and I think are really seeing some of that talent on screen and off screen in ways that we haven't in the decades prior. And so joining this team to tell the story about Billy Tipton was not only just an exciting opportunity to tell a complex story about trans history, but also to say, look at all this talent. Welcome to the world of trans masculine actors who are all excited to step toward what it could mean to think about Billy Tipton together from this very contemporary moment. And to say that we have writers, we have directors, but it's not just about trans people telling trans stories, it's about people collaborating to tell stories about dynamic, underexplored histories and people.
Well, you have a very unique approach to this documentary. Like I said in the introduction, no ordinary documentary either. It's not, you don't give us an A to B kind of profile of Billy Tipton. It's not a history of Billy Tipton. It is, like you said, there's a community of trans actors and artists who are speaking to that legacy. They're all chiming in and they're all interpreting it. At what point did that shape begin to take form? How did that develop?
It started pretty early on in the writing and development phase of it, where there was there's no moving images of Billy Tipton. So there wasn't an archive that we kind of pull from him, like here he is performing here and here and there. There was just, there were photos of him. There was a biography that was written about him by a woman named Diane Middlebrook. That's, you know, we address her problematic ways of gendering Billy in the film. But also there was some of his recordings from his rehearsals and stuff like that in his albums. But there wasn't any moving images of him that we could draw from. So then it was like, okay, there's whatever we put out into the world will be what people think about Billy as a person, like what will be attached to Billy's image forever. So that's a lot of responsibility. And so when we were in conceiving this project, I was like, well, everyone comes to these things, everyone comes to the table with a bias, no matter what their experience is. And are we going to say that how we represent Billy with one actor and one recreation is the way that Billy should be remembered forever and for the rest of time? So that's where it became this process of like reflection of like, there's many different ways to project. There's many different stories you can project onto Billy. He's not here to tell his story. So let's explore the different avenues and experiences through this way that an actor has to inhabit a person by asking the questions, what would this person be feeling like here? How would this person react to this thing? So we wrote out these different scenes and we were able to kind of play with it, like wrote out different scenes from his life that we had learned about. And instead of doing kind of a recreation or something cheesy, like an Unsolved Mysteries style of like smoky, walk through a club kind of situation, we made that process and discovery as part of the way we can tell this story from multiple points of view, which was way more fun too,
So Chase, when I watched this film, the importance of authorship, it really struck me. Like having someone within the community deep in the conversation really stands out. And especially in the scenes where you have trans actors auditioning to play Billy Tipton. And in order to play Billy Tipton, you have one actor named Marquise who he really talks through like his own experiences, what would be going on in his head if he was in that position, and trying to translate that into Billy's experience and bringing out Billy's experience that way. So that really, I felt, deepened the conversation. And it also, it pointed out to me again why it's so crucial to have the community that is being represented in front of the camera and also behind the camera, and within the skin of the actor.
So, one of the things that I love so much about that scene in particular is it's an example of Aisling and Amos's work as writers, Aisling and my work as directors, and Marquise's work as an actor coming together to produce new meaning in the room. So everyone had their expectations of the scene, and no one could have anticipated the way that Marquise walked toward that scene with his own personal experience. And I really feel like it's an emblematic moment in the film of the broader method.
Okay. Well, now the other thing about that scene though is Marquise is Black. Okay, Billy Tipton was not Black, and and this is what is playing out in this film. Like in terms of the casting, you were making sure to represent the trans community with all these trans artists, but you were also opening the doors to so many other races and calling. So can you talk to me about why you made that choice and why this film benefited from that choice?
Yeah, the film, the casting and the auditions and the casting room and the whole process of making that whole process is part of making the documentary. So it was about showing an array of different experiences and transmasculine talent from many different walks of life. So we're not actually creating a fictionalized version that's supposed to be, physically true to form of what Billy looked like, because then, essentially almost none of those guys could play Billy Tipton, like he was a 5'4", like little guy from the South, So in terms of removing some of these ideas that only a certain type of person can play another type of person, we're removing it all to just have the discussion on look at the talent, look at the experience, look at what all these people can bring to the table when given the chance, So that's my perspective on it. Chase?
Yeah, and I think too, the casting call was for a documentary explicitly. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that the people who self-selected to tape and then arrive in the room were coming with an investment to think out loud with others about what it would mean to tell a story about transmasculine history. And so I think Marquise, who identifies as a Black transmasculine person, is bringing his own embodied personal perspective to what's at stake being a body in that room telling these stories. And he's an example of one of many in the film who do it from different socio-political and identificatory locations.
Well, then, I mean, talk to me when we often have these conversations again about authorship, about making sure the right community is represented, but talk to me about making sure that you are creating a safe space for these voices to be heard, because I think oftentimes people who are brought in can worry about being tokenized within these productions. They could worry about being kind of paraded around as, oh, here I am, here we're doing our due diligence when it comes to representation. How do you make sure that those voices are nurtured and feel safe to really express themselves?
Well, I mean, and again, I can only speak from my perspective on this, but it was homegrown, you know, like it wasn't like it was an afterthought to have trans people involved in this film, you know. So it was, I think there was a lot, you know, with Amos coming on board and Chase coming on board, and you know, myself in where I stand in the filmmaking community, like I think there was a trust there on who we are as individuals and our own experiences, and you know, Chase, you can speak closer to that, because Chase was also the director, like when we were there on set every single day with each other, but we also split off our different tasks and talents in order to, like, you know, really maximize on what our skill sets are and what we both bring to the table. And so when there was during the interviews, Chase was the director who was doing the sit down interviews, and I was the one, you know, working more with the crew and making sure that it looked like it should, you know. So you know, I think there's a discussion of community there that I was happy to take a back seat to, you know.
And I think that's part of the reason why we move toward making visible the production of the film itself, which is to continue to account for our own positions on and off camera. And, you know, I think that the idea of a safe space is a fantasy. I think what we can do is be as explicit as possible about our own intentions and our own limitations, and create as many opportunities for people to step toward our project or to step away, and to feel really clear that people have agency and people have choice, and that we want to honor that. There is no gotcha. I mean, what is a film about trans is without a gotcha moment? Our whole thing is pushing back against the kind of narrative revisioning that happens time and time again to trans and gender nonconforming subjects on screen. And so how can we be really accountable to that and to try and move differently together?
You know, Chase, your short films, are they documentaries as well, or are they fiction? They're all documentaries? Okay. So so you've worked then, I guess, strictly in the documentary realm, whereas Aisling, she just can't make up her mind. You know, well, first of all, she's a producer on Rhymes for Young Ghouls, and she's also produced some documentaries. And then, you know, just last year, she was at TIFF with a fiction feature film that she directed, The Rest of Us, and now she's back into the documentary train. There's two questions in this. I want to talk about, like, is there a monumental shift in gears when you're shifting from narrative to documentary? And then talking about, like, kind of when you're forced to shoot within 9 days, how much planning does it take to get to that point? And what do you need to make sure you know when you're preparing to shoot, and and how light on your feet do you have to be after you shoot?
It's not a monumental shift. I mean, it's you know, logistically different to make a documentary and a fiction film, but this one was not the type of documentary where we're, you know, we're embedding and spending a year and a half with a family and just sort of shooting on the fly everything. Like, it was very, very planned out, because we had sit down interviews. We had them like, the ironic thing is like the rest of us, I shot handheld available light in a very documentary naturalistic style. And this was a 2-camera setup with, you know, on tripods and with lighting. So it was like, that was much more controlled and staged in a way than I did on the fiction film. But you know, I mean, we're still telling the story about someone's life, and it's still, you know, there's still a lot of different personalities and characters in the storytelling. So it's just telling a human story with whatever means and what type of media you've decided to use for that storytelling. So I don't think that there's too much of a difference beyond the fact that logistically it's obviously a much smaller team. It's a different type of budget. It's a different type of process in that regard. But But yeah, I mean, in terms of like us having limited shooting days, like I don't know a single documentary that's ever shot, a feature film documentary that's ever shot in 9 days. So, you know, luckily, because we had it set up as like, we had casting and interviews in Los Angeles and in New York City, and we went to Spokane, Washington to go be with Billy Jr., Billy Tipton's son, for 3 or 4 days. And that's what we kind of had. And then we had to work, you know, then it was like gathering the archival material and the photos and stuff like that to really craft the story in the edit. And that's quite normal for a documentary, is that you're doing a lot of the screenwriting and the crafting in post-production. So we were in post for quite a while after we finished.
So look, Chase, you've been to Tribeca with your short films. This is your first time at TIFF. Ashling's a bit of a veteran at TIFF. You know, she's been here as a producer. She's been here last year, just premiered The Rest of Us as a director. She's back again this year. And I met Ashling at TIFF when she didn't even have a film. So talk to me about how do you wield a film festival to your best advantage? How do you get your film into a festival, first of all, but even if you're not having a film, what do you do to take advantage of a film festival as a young filmmaker?
It's a great question. And it's an interesting question to answer on Zoom with you today. You know, I'm a big fan of showing up. I'm a big fan of showing up in space, showing up in rooms, showing up in conversations, showing up in the work, and building relationships. I think, you know, as a trans maker, I know that there aren't hundreds of trans makers walking around TIFF. And so really trying to work and network with those who are closest in our networked communities and to break open space. I think it matters to, you know, I consider myself to be of a legacy of people that extends from John Grayson and, you know, experimental Canadian makers who were making space in big mainstream industrial international film festivals when I was young, not making anything. And so trying to always think about how projects can open up space for projects in the future.
Thank you, Ashling and Chase, and thank you, Telefilm Canada, for hosting this spotlight on Canadian talent.